Hi everyone, it's Shannon here. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, we are going to do some no-line coloring with colored pencils and the new Bear Hug stamp set. This is the adorable Bear Hug stamp set. It is illustrated by Big Bear and Bird, and I just love the critters in the set. There's even a kitty, which is my favorite. I'm going to stamp it on some white cardstock here in antique distress ink, antique linen distress ink. This is a really light colored ink, and that's because I want to use something light for this no-line coloring. Really, any light color ink would work here. It doesn't have to be something that's water soluble because we are just going to use some colored pencils for this. I do want to also point out that I did stamp this image a couple times just to make sure that the antique linen was dark enough so I could actually see the lines in this image. So I'm going to start with the pig here, and I have 3 pinks picked out, and just like with my Copics, with my colored pencils I start with my lightest shade, and I am kind of just laying that base color down with that lightest shade. Now I'm going over with that same shade and kind of darkening areas that I know I'm going to have darker and shaded. So areas that I know I want to kind of build up a gradation so it creates that look of roundness. Now I'm moving on to my medium color here, and I'm going back over those areas that I colored a little bit more with my lightest shade to make it a little bit darker, and now I'm coloring with my medium shade. I do even go over the edge of the image in some parts, like for some areas, like the very tip of the pig's ear, I didn't go over with my pencil. That is because that area I think is going to be in a very bright spot. So if I do outline that edge there, it's going to be with my lightest color. So that's something I keep in mind too. So now I'm moving on to my darkest shade here and coloring a little bit more, just very little. I'm using the least amount of this color because this could easily overpower, and then I'll lose that nice gradation. It'll start to look flat if I get too much of it on there. I want to make sure I kind of really carefully blend it out, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm going back through my colors. Now you can see I'm back on my medium color here, and I'm trying to blend that out so I have a nice smooth transition, a smooth gradation here. And I am also kind of building up the color a little bit too, so the pig is a little bit bolder but still has a nice smooth transition between the 3 colors. So now I'm moving on to the bear, and what you can maybe notice here is when I have a big area to color, I kind of employ this crosshatch style of coloring. So it's not a circle, but I go from one angle to the other angle and then at a diagonal, and like a 45-degree angle, and then I'll go on the other side of the bear and do the same thing at a different diagonal, and they kind of meet and make like a crisscross. That's a crosshatch coloring style, and I find that I get a really smooth blend over the surface, or smooth coloring over the surface when I use that crosshatch style. And I use that for big areas. When I start to move to smaller areas and kind of doing the shading where I'm not totally trying to cover the whole surface, that's when I will kind of do more circle strokes. So right now I'm cleaning up a little mistake with a Tombow mono sand eraser. So those erasers that you typically use to get ink, like ink smears or ink mistakes off your paper. It works great for colored pencils as well. So that's something, if you do make a mistake with colored pencils, it doesn't have to be permanent. You can erase it. And I found that sand eraser works pretty good. So now I'm moving on to the fox. And I forgot to point out, hopefully you've noticed so far, but all the colored pencils that I'm using are on screen so you can follow along. The fox, I used 4 colors. I think it's just because I went from kind of a dark red to more of a corally. It was a kind of a big shift in range here. And I really like how that fox turned out. I'm finishing up his features, his little nose and eyes with black, and I'm going to do 2, kind of like a light blue and a darker blue for the white areas on the fox. Again, starting with that light blue, not even covering the whole surface with the light blue, and then finishing up with just a tiny amount of, well, it's not really a dark blue, it's kind of like a dark, like a stormy blue kind of color. Now I'm moving on to the bunny. I used a couple soft colors there. Bunny's pretty simple. Use the same kind of blues for the white areas on the bunny. And now I'm working on the bird here. A couple yellows for that and a little bit of orange for his beak. It's kind of hard to tell right now, but he has a teeny tiny beak. And then for the kitty, this is where I struggled the most because I wanted most of that cat to be white. So I did use my blue combo, but I felt like that had a little bit too much of a blue tint, so I kind of erased some of it and started incorporating more gray, and I liked that results too. I still have that light blue but then more of a dark gray instead of my dark blue for the kitty. And then the patches were really easy, just some oranges for the patches. And then I will finish her up with a little pink nose, and that finishes my coloring. And I'll hold it to the camera so you can get a good look at this. Colored pencils is definitely not the fast way to go, but what I love about it is it really does impart a really soft, fuzzy quality, and I think it works really well for these critters. So I'm going to make a frame. I have 2 circle dies from the Nesting Circles die set, and I'm going to die cut them out of some tan cardstock to create this circle frame. I carefully removed those circles, leaving the tape on in place, and the circles dies in the exact position, and then die cut them out of some white cardstock as well. And now I'm going to glue my 2 circles together, and that's just going to, you know, build up the dimension of that circle frame just a little bit, make it a little bit beefier. Now I'm going to move on to an ink blended background. So I picked out some Distress Oxides here. I'm starting with cracked pistachio, and I'm going to blend that in the middle, and then I'm going to move out to some darker color on the edges, and this is Lucky Clover, and I'm just going to blend that out. Really simple, wanted to keep it pretty easy, but nice and something that would really make the animals pop. And so now I'm going back through my colors to kind of smooth out the gradation, and then I looked at it and I thought it wasn't dark enough on the edges, so I grabbed some Pine Needles Distress ink. You could definitely use Pine Needles Distress Oxide if you have that instead. I don't own that one, so I just grabbed the ink here, and I think it did a great job. And after I blend those edges and get them a little darker, I take my Distress sprayer, spritz my panel, and then pick up the water droplets, and that just adds a nice kind of speckly look, and I think it's just really pretty, kind of creates like an atmosphere. I'm going to set that aside to dry. Once that panel is completely dry, I then have it in my MISTI here. I don't have my critter or my frames actually glued in place. I just am holding them in place just a little bit to help me figure out where I want the sentiment to go. So I pick the sentiment up with my MISTI, and now I'm carefully kind of arcing it, carefully curving that sentiment. I want my curve to match kind of that curve on the bottom of the critters and the curve of the frame a little bit. So now I'm just tweaking it, kind of going back and forth, trying to get that sentiment to match that frame, and just using the suction power of the stamp itself to kind of hold it in place. And once I have it that curve the way I want it, then I will remove my frame and my critters and then stamp it in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Now I'm going to move on to just finalizing this and finishing it up. So the first thing I do is add some glue to the back side of my frame and then kind of center it and place that down. Once I have my frame in place, I'm going to grab my critters. I did add a piece of foam tape to the back side, just remove the backing, center that, and pop that down in place. And that will actually complete my card. And I'll hold the card up to the camera so you can get another look at the coloring on this card. I really do love coloring with my colored pencils. It is a slower process, but I really love that soft look. And I think it just, when I saw this image, I knew I was going to color with colored pencils. I just think it pairs really well. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you'd like any more information on the products I use, please check out the links below in the description. You can also check out my blog or follow me on Instagram. And if you like this video, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day.